The velvet darkness of the Duke's carriage held her like a coffin, and Verity Carlyle pressed her bruised cheek against the cold leather seat, praying the wheels would carry her far enough before he discovered what she'd done. Behind her lay 3 years of hell disguised as marriage. Ahead, only the desperate hope that a stranger's mercy might prove stronger than society's chains. Welcome, my beloved. Before we dive into the whole story, please click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow I will be giving you another story just as beautiful as this one, and you don't want to miss it. Now, let's get into it. The rain came down in sheets across the cobblestones of Bath, turning the elegant streets into rivers of mud and regret. Verity stood in the shadows of the coaching inn, her cloak pulled tight despite offering little protection from either the weather or the eyes that might recognize her. Her hands shook, not from cold, though the November chill cut through her threadbare dress, but from the knowledge that what she was about to do would either save her life or destroy what little remained of it. The Duke of Ashmont's carriage sat gleaming in the torchlight, its burgundy paint and gold trim announcing its owner's wealth as effectively as a herald's trumpet. She'd watched him enter the inn an hour ago, his tall frame rigid with aristocratic bearing, his expression suggesting he'd rather be anywhere else. Good. A man eager to leave wouldn't linger over his meal. Her fingers found the locket at her throat, the only piece of her mother she had left. Inside was a miniature portrait and a lock of golden hair, both growing more precious as the years stole her memories. Mother would be horrified by what her daughter had become, or perhaps she would understand. Perhaps she too had known what it meant to smile at guests while wearing long sleeves to hide the bruises. The carriage door stood unguarded. The driver had disappeared into the stables, likely seeking warmth and ale. It was now or never. Verity's heart hammered against her ribs as she darted across the courtyard, her worn boots splashing through puddles. Every sound felt amplified: the rustle of her skirts, the creak of the carriage door, her own ragged breathing. Inside, the smell of leather and tobacco wrapped around her. She wedged herself into the narrow space beneath the rear bench, contorting her body into impossible angles. The darkness pressed close, intimate and suffocating. She pulled her cloak over her head and forced herself to breathe slowly, quietly, as Silas had taught her. Don't make noise. Don't draw attention. Become invisible, or pay the price. The sound of boots on cobblestones made her freeze. Voices drifted through the rain, the driver returning, grumbling about the weather. Then another voice, deeper, cultured, carrying the easy authority of someone who'd never had to beg for anything. The Duke. I want to reach Thornbury before midnight. The roads will be worse if we delay. Yes, Your Grace. The carriage shifted as someone climbed aboard. Verity bit down on her knuckle to keep from gasping as the bench above her creaked under the Duke's weight. The door slammed shut. A moment later, the carriage lurched forward, wheels clattering against stone. She'd done it. She was leaving Bath, leaving Silas, leaving behind the woman she'd been forced to become. Every rotation of the wheels carried her farther from the house where she'd learned that marriage could be a kind of death, where she'd discovered that screaming brought no help because proper ladies didn't scream, where she'd finally understood that society would rather see her dead than divorced. The darkness beneath the bench was complete, but Verity kept her eyes open anyway. She'd spent too many nights in darkness, waiting for Silas's footsteps, listening for the particular tone of voice that meant pain was coming. At least, this darkness was hers. This fear was chosen, not inflicted. Miles passed. The rain continued its assault on the carriage roof, a percussion that matched her racing pulse. Above her, the Duke shifted occasionally, his boots coming perilously close to her hiding place. Once, something fell, a book perhaps, and she heard him mutter a curse as he retrieved it. Such a small, human sound. She'd almost forgotten that men could be human. that they could express frustration without violence. Her legs cramped. Her shoulder ached where it pressed against the carriage wall. But she remained motionless, counting heartbeats, measuring distance in the rhythm of hoofbeats. 5 miles. 10. 15. Far enough that even if the Duke discovered her now and turned back, she'd have a head start. Far enough that Silas would have to search, would have to expend effort she prayed he wouldn't bother with. After all, she was a disappointing wife, a failure at the one role society demanded of her. Perhaps he'd be relieved to be rid of her. The carriage hit a rut in the road, bouncing violently. Verity's head struck the underside of the bench with a muted thud that seemed to echo like thunder in her ears. She bit her lip, tasting blood, willing herself not to cry out. Above her, the Duke went very still. "Driver," he called out, his voice sharp. "Stop the carriage." No. Not yet. Not when she'd come so far. But the wheels were already slowing, the horses whinnying in protest at the sudden command. Verity's lungs forgot how to work. This was it. Discovery. And with it, judgment from a man who had every legal right and social obligation to return her to her husband. The carriage door opened. Rain swept in, cold and brutal. The Duke's boots appeared in her limited field of vision, polished leather now splattered with mud. He stood there for a long moment, and she knew, somehow she knew that he'd heard something, sensed something wrong. "You can come out now," he said quietly. Not angry. Not yet. Just infinitely weary, as though the universe had played one too many tricks on him. Verity didn't move. Couldn't move. Every instinct screamed at her to stay hidden, stay safe, even though both options were illusions. "I'm not going to hurt you." His voice dropped lower, almost gentle. "But I'm also not going to continue this journey with a stowaway hiding in my carriage. So, you have two choices. You can emerge with some dignity intact, or I can extract you myself. Your preference." Dignity was a luxury Verity had surrendered the night she married Silas Carlyle. Still, some stubborn part of her refused to be dragged from her hiding place like a common thief. She uncurled herself slowly, joints protesting, and emerged into the gray afternoon light with her chin raised and her eyes defiant. The Duke of Ashmont stared at her with an expression that cycled through surprise, confusion, and something that might have been recognition. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 35, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar despite obvious attempts to tame it. His eyes were an unusual shade of gray-green, like the sea before a storm, and they studied her with an intensity that made her want to look away. She didn't. She'd looked away from too many men already. "Well," he said finally, "this is irregular." A laugh bubbled up in Verity's throat, sharp and slightly hysterical. "You're injured." His gaze had found the bruise on her cheekbone, the one she'd thought the shadows would hide. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I'm fine." "You're bleeding." He nodded toward her lip, where she'd bitten through the skin during the rough ride. Before she could protest, he'd produced a handkerchief pristine white linen with his monogram embroidered in silver thread and held it out to her. Verity stared at the handkerchief as if it were a snake. In her experience, men who offered comfort with one hand delivered pain with the other. "I don't need." "Take it." Not a command, exactly, but firm enough that she found herself obeying, pressing the soft fabric to her mouth. It smelled faintly of sandalwood and something else, something clean and masculine that bore no resemblance to Silas's cloying cologne. The Duke stepped back, giving her space to fully exit the carriage. The rain had lessened to a drizzle, but the wind cut through her damp cloak with ruthless efficiency. She stood on the muddy road, aware of how she must look, bedraggled, bruised, desperate. I'm Everett Ashford, he said, as if they were being introduced at a ball rather than on a deserted highway. Duke of Ashmont, though I've always thought the title sounds pretentious. And you are? She hesitated. Giving her real name meant risking everything, but lying seemed pointless now. He could easily discover the truth if he chose to investigate. Verity Carlyle. For one. Something flickered across his face. Carlyle, the baronet's wife. Double C. When the prosody. Carlyle. Of course he knew. Society was a spider's web, and everyone was caught in it. Yes, your husband is looking for you. Not a question. I imagine he is. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Though not, I suspect, out of concern for my welfare. Everett was quiet for a long moment, his gaze moving over her again, not with the predatory assessment she'd learned to fear, but with something closer to calculation. When he spoke, his words were measured. Get back in the carriage, Mrs. Carlyle. We'll discuss this out of the rain. Are you taking me back to Bath? The question emerged, small, defeated. No, he said it simply, as if the decision required no deliberation. I'm taking you to Thornbury. Beyond that, we'll see. Verity's knees nearly buckled with relief. She climbed back into the carriage properly this time, through the door like a person rather than cargo, and settled onto the velvet cushions. Everett followed, arranging himself on the opposite bench with careful distance between them. He rapped twice on the ceiling, and the carriage resumed its journey. The silence stretched, filled only with the sound of wheels on wet road and rain against the roof. Verity clutched his handkerchief, watching him from beneath her lashes. He wasn't looking at her anymore. His gaze had turned toward the window, his expression distant and unreadable. Why? She finally asked. Why aren't you returning me? He turned back to her, and for the first time, she saw something raw in his eyes, some old pain that resonated with her own. Because I know what it's like to feel trapped in a life you never wanted. Because society's rules are written by people who've never had to live with their consequences. Because if I turn away from you now, I'll have become the very thing I despise. Verity felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back furiously. She would not cry. Not yet. Not when she didn't know if she was safe or simply caught in a different kind of trap. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Mrs. Carlyle. You may come to regret accepting help from a man with my particular reputation. Your reputation? A bitter smile twisted his mouth. I'm known as the Hermit Duke. Society finds my preference for solitude over their tedious gatherings deeply offensive. I'm considered eccentric at best, mad at worst, hardly the champion a lady in distress should want. I'm hardly a lady in distress, Verity said quietly. I'm a married woman, fleeing her husband. Society already considers me worse than mad, they consider me immoral. Then we're well matched in our scandalousness. Everett leaned back against the cushions, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. Tell me, Mrs. Carlyle, do you have a plan? Family who might shelter you? Resources? The questions she'd been avoiding. No family. My parents died years ago. As for resources, she gestured at her threadbare dress, her worn boots. Everything I own belongs to my husband, legally speaking. Then you'll stay at Thornbury, Everett said, as if the matter were settled. At least until we determine a more permanent solution. Verity's breath caught. Your Grace, I couldn't possibly. You can, and you will. He held up a hand to forestall her protests. Before you argue about propriety, let me remind you that propriety is the weapon society uses to keep women like you trapped in situations like yours. My estate is large enough that your presence can be discreet. I have a housekeeper who's more dragon than woman. Mrs. Humphreys will ensure everything remains above reproach. 2. And when Silas comes looking for me? Because he will. Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. Not because he loves me, but because I'm his property. He won't tolerate the embarrassment of a runaway wife. Everett's expression hardened into something that might have frightened her if it weren't directed past her, at some invisible enemy. Then, he'll have to go through me. And I promise you, Mrs. Carlyle, I'm far more difficult to intimidate than I might appear. The carriage hit another rut, jostling them both. Verity gripped the edge of the bench, her injured shoulder protesting. She must have winced, because Everett leaned forward with concern. How badly are you hurt? It's nothing. The lie came automatically, polished by 3 years of practice. It's not nothing if you can barely move without pain. His tone gentled. I'm not asking you to show me. I'm simply trying to assess whether you need a physician. A physician would ask questions. A physician would see the evidence of what Silas had done. Not just the fresh bruises, but the old scars, the healed fractures that hadn't set quite right. A physician would either report her back to her husband or become complicit in her escape. And she had no right to ask anyone to carry that burden. No physician, she said firmly. Please. Everett studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Very well. But Mrs. Humphreys is quite skilled with medicinal herbs and poultices. You'll allow her to tend to you? At least? It wasn't really a question. But Verity appreciated the illusion of choice. Yes. Thank you. Verity. The miles continued to unspool beneath them. The landscape outside the windows shifted from the elegant architecture of Bath to rolling countryside. Fields giving way to forests. Verity had never been this far from the city. Silas preferred town life, where he could maintain his carefully constructed image of the devoted husband. In public, he was charming, solicitous, the very picture of marital devotion. Only she knew how quickly that mask slipped once they were alone. May I ask you something? Everett's voice pulled her from her dark thoughts. Of course. How long has he been hurting you? The directness of the question stole her breath. Most people danced around such matters, cloaked them in euphemisms and polite fiction. But Everett simply asked, his gray-green eyes steady on hers, and something about his straightforwardness made lying feel impossible. Since our wedding night, she admitted. He was different during our courtship. Attentive, kind, everything a young woman might hope for. I thought myself fortunate. A bitter laugh escaped her. How naive I was. 5? You weren't naive. You were deceived. There's a difference. Everett's hands had curled into fists on his thighs, though his voice remained calm. Men like your husband are experts at deception. They wear civility like a costume, removing it only when there are no witnesses. You speak as if you've known men like him. I have. Something dark crossed his features. There. And gone so quickly she might have imagined it. My own father was cut from similar cloth. Different in method, perhaps, but the same in essence, a man who viewed his family as possessions rather than people. Verity felt a surge of understanding, sharp and immediate. This was why he'd helped her. Not out of abstract nobility or Christian duty, but because he recognized the particular hell she'd escaped from. He'd lived in his own version of it. Your mother? She asked softly. Died when I was 14. The physician called it heart failure. His jaw clenched. I've often wondered if hearts can fail simply from being broken too many times. The carriage fell silent again, but it was a different kind of silence now, not the awkward tension of strangers, but the quiet understanding between two people who'd both learned that monsters often wear human faces and respectable names. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the clouds in shades of amber and rose. Verity watched the colors shift and change. And for the first time in 3 years, she allowed herself to feel something dangerously close to hope. She was still legally bound to Silas, still trapped by laws that gave husbands absolute authority over their wives, still facing social ruin and potential criminal charges for desertion. But she was also miles away from Bath, sitting across from a man who'd chosen compassion over compliance with society's cruel expectations. And that had to count for something. "We're nearly there," Everett said, nodding toward the window. "Thornbury lies just beyond that hill." Verity peered out and saw the silhouette of a great house rising against the darkening sky, its windows beginning to glow with candlelight. It looked like something from a fairy tale, imposing yet somehow welcoming, solid and permanent in a way that made her throat tight with emotion. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It's home," Everett replied simply. "And for as long as you need it, Mrs. Carlyle, it's yours as well." Thornbury was even more magnificent up close. The carriage swept through iron gates and up a curved drive lined with ancient oak trees, their bare branches reaching toward the sky like cathedral spires. The house itself was Georgian in style, all elegant proportions and classical symmetry, built from honey-colored stone that glowed warmly in the lamplight. Servants appeared as the carriage rolled to a stop. Footmen in burgundy livery, moving with practiced efficiency. But it was the woman who emerged from the front entrance who commanded Verity's attention, tall and formidable, with steel-gray hair swept into a severe bun and sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Your Grace," the woman said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd run this household for decades. "We weren't expecting you until tomorrow." Plans changed, Mrs. Humphreys. Everett descended from the carriage and turned back to offer Verity his hand. She took it, trying not to flinch when her bruised ribs protested the movement. "We have a guest. Mrs. Verity Carlyle will be staying with us indefinitely. I trust you'll prepare the blue room?" Mrs. Humphreys's keen gaze swept over Verity, taking in every detail: the worn cloak, the bruised face, the way she held herself as if expecting a blow. Something shifted in the housekeeper's expression, hardening into resolve. "Of course, Your Grace. The blue room has the finest view and is far from the main house. Very private." The emphasis on that last word wasn't subtle. Mrs. Humphreys understood exactly what kind of situation this was, and she was already positioning herself as an ally. Verity felt something loosen in her chest. "Mrs. Carlyle has been injured," Everett continued. "I'd be grateful if you'd attend to her personally. No need to involve the other staff unnecessarily." "Understood, Your Grace." Mrs. Humphreys stepped forward, her stern features softening slightly as she addressed Verity directly. "Come along, dear. Let's get you warm and fed. You look half frozen." "As in?" Verity glanced at Everett, suddenly reluctant to leave his presence. He'd become an anchor in the storm, and stepping away felt like cutting herself loose again. But he gave her an encouraging nod. "You're safe here, Mrs. Carlyle. I give you my word." Mrs. Humphreys led her through corridors that spoke of generations of wealth and taste, portraits of stern-faced ancestors, furniture that gleamed with beeswax polish, carpets so thick they muffled footsteps. The blue room was at the end of a quiet hallway, and when Mrs. Humphreys opened the door, Verity couldn't suppress a small gasp. The room was beautiful. Walls papered in pale blue silk, a four-poster bed draped in ivory linens, a fireplace already crackling with warmth. French doors opened onto a small balcony overlooking gardens that would surely be spectacular in spring. But it was the private sitting area with its comfortable chairs and well-stocked bookshelves that made Verity's throat tight with emotion. This wasn't a guest room. This was a sanctuary. His Grace lost his mother young, Mrs. Humphreys said quietly, moving to light additional candles. Made him sensitive to suffering. I think, especially suffering that happens behind closed doors, where polite society pretends not to see it. You know, Verity said, not a question. I know that you're running from something, and that His Grace has decided to help you. That's enough for me. The housekeeper turned, her expression fierce. I've been with this family for 40 years, girl. I've seen things that would make your hair curl. And I've learned that sometimes the only way to survive is to break the rules that were designed to trap you. Verity felt tears spill over before she could stop them. She'd been so strong for so long, holding herself together through sheer force of will. But kindness, unexpected, undeserved kindness, shattered her defenses completely. There now, Mrs. Humphreys said, not unkindly. Let it out. You're safe here. With trembling hands, Verity removed her cloak, then her dress. The housekeeper's face remained impassive as she catalogued the damage, the finger-shaped bruises on Verity's upper arms, the mottled purple-green marks on her ribs, the older scars that told a story of systematic cruelty. She said nothing, but her lips compressed into a thin line that promised retribution if she ever met the man responsible. Mrs. Humphreys worked efficiently, applying salves that stung briefly before bringing blessed relief, wrapping Verity's ribs with strips of clean linen, examining her shoulder with gentle but firm hands. Nothing broken currently, though I suspect you've had breaks before that weren't properly set. The bruising will fade in a week or two. Thank you, Verity whispered. Save your thanks. The housekeeper helped her into a clean nightgown, soft cotton, that felt like luxury against her skin. I'm having a bath drawn and dinner sent up. You'll eat, you'll bathe, and you'll sleep. True to her word, servants appeared with a copper tub and steaming water, a tray laden with soup, fresh bread, cheese, and fruit. Mrs. Humphreys supervised it all with military precision, then shooed everyone out, including herself, leaving Verity finally, blessedly alone. She lowered herself into the bath with a sigh that came from her soul. The hot water worked magic on her aching muscles, washing away days of fear and grime. She scrubbed her skin until it was pink, shampooed her hair twice, as if she could wash away the memory of Silas's hands in it, pulling, yanking, using it to control her. After, wrapped in a dressing gown that was far too large but wonderfully warm, she ate everything on the tray. She hadn't realized how hungry she was. Silas had taken to controlling her meals, claiming she was getting fat, though she'd lost weight under his rule. The simple food tasted better than any banquet. Finally, she climbed into the enormous bed, sinking into mattress and pillows that felt like clouds. Through the window, she could see stars emerging in the darkening sky. More stars than she'd ever seen in Bath with its street lamps and smoke. She'd done it. She'd escaped. And tomorrow she would worry about Silas finding her, about the legal impossibility of her situation, about the scandal that would destroy what remained of her reputation. But tonight, in this beautiful room with its locked door and soft bed, she allowed herself to simply exist, to breathe without fear, to close her eyes without wondering if she'd wake to violence. Sleep came quickly, deep and dreamless, the first peaceful rest she'd had in 3 years. Morning arrived with pale sunlight streaming through the French doors and the sound of birdsong from the gardens below. For one disoriented moment, Verity forgot where she was. Then memory returned the carriage, the Duke, Thornbury, and she sat up too quickly, her ribs protesting the sudden movement. A knock at the door made her tense. Come in, she called, her voice still rough with sleep. A young maid entered carrying a tray with tea and toast. Morning, ma'am. Mrs. Humphreys said, You're to take your time this morning. His Grace is in the library when you're ready, but there's no rush. The girl bobbed a curtsy and left before Verity could respond. She ate slowly, savoring the hot tea and butter-slathered toast. Then dressed in the simple day gown that had been laid out, blue muslin that fit reasonably well, though it was clearly borrowed from someone with a fuller figure. Someone who'd once lived in this house. Perhaps. She didn't let herself wonder too much about that. The journey to the library took her through corridors bathed in morning light. Paintings she'd barely noticed last night revealed themselves in detail landscapes, hunting scenes, portraits of Ashford ancestors whose gray-green eyes marked them as Everett's kin. She found herself studying one portrait in particular, a dark-haired woman with kind eyes and Everett's same slight smile. My mother. Verity spun to find Everett standing a few paces behind her, dressed more casually than yesterday in buff trousers and a dark green coat. No cravat. He looked younger without the formal attire, less the imposing duke, and more simply a man. She was beautiful, Verity said. She was. He moved to stand beside her, gazing up at the portrait. This was painted 2 years before she died. I remember the artist Italian fellow, who stayed for a month. She hated sitting still for so long, but father insisted. He liked surrounding himself with beautiful things, even if he didn't appreciate them properly. There was an ocean of pain in those carefully chosen words. Verity understood. I'm sorry, as am I, for your losses. He gestured toward the library. Shall we? I've taken the liberty of asking my solicitor to visit. He should arrive this afternoon. The library was magnificent. 2 stories of books with a gallery running around the upper level. Leather chairs positioned to catch the best light. A massive desk near windows overlooking the gardens. It smelled of paper and leather and the subtle scent of tobacco. Everett poured tea from a service already waiting, his movements precise and oddly domestic. I spent most of the night thinking about your situation. Legally, it's complicated. Legally, I have no situation, Verity said quietly, accepting the teacup. I'm a married woman who fled her husband. The law is entirely on Silas's side. The law, perhaps. But there are other considerations. He settled into the chair opposite hers. You mentioned having no family, no resources. But surely you had friends before your marriage? Anyone who might testify to changes they observed in you? Verity thought back to the early days with Silas, how systematically he'd isolated her. There was Lady Pembroke. She was kind to me during my first season. But Silas found her influence unsuitable. He discouraged the friendship. The memory stung. Lady Pembroke had tried to maintain contact, had sent notes and invitations, but Silas had intercepted them all. Eventually, the invitations stopped coming. We'll find her, Everett said with quiet determination, and anyone else who might have noticed. Building a case for legal separation requires evidence and allies. It won't be easy, and it won't be quick, but it can be done. At what cost to you? The question burst out before she could stop it. Your Grace. You're risking your reputation by harboring me. If Silas makes a public accusation, let him. Steel entered Everett's voice. I've spent a decade avoiding society's judgment by simply removing myself from society. But perhaps it's time I put my position to better use than mere self-preservation. A duke has certain privileges. Mrs. Carlyle. Chief among them is the ability to weather scandals that would destroy others. You don't know Silas. Fear crept into her voice despite her efforts to suppress it. He's not just cruel, he's clever. He'll paint me as mad, unstable, and adulterous. He'll say anything to discredit me and force my return. Then we'll need to be cleverer. Everett leaned forward, his expression intent. Tell me everything about him. His habits, his associates, his vulnerabilities. Men like your husband always have secrets they'd prefer to keep hidden. We'll find them. Something shifted in Verity's chest, a spark of something that might have been hope or might have been rage. For 3 years, she'd been powerless, a victim with no recourse. But Everett was offering her something different. Not just protection, but the possibility of fighting back. He gambles, she said slowly, heavily. He's in debt to several gentlemen's clubs in London. That's partly why he married me. My dowry was substantial, which he now controls. Every penny. The bitterness in her voice surprised her. My father left me well provided for. Silas went through most of it in the first year. Everett's eyes glinted with something predatory. Gambling debts. That's useful. What else? He has a mistress. Several, actually. Though one in particular, an actress named Kitty Forsyth. He keeps her in a house on Milsom Street. The words came easier now, as if speaking them aloud drained them of their power to hurt. He's not discreet about it. Half of Bath knows. Better and better. Everett pulled out a leather journal and began making notes. A man with debts, mistresses, and a reputation for propriety to maintain. That gives us leverage. They spent the next hour cataloging Silas's weaknesses and excesses. With each revelation, Verity felt lighter, as if she were transferring the weight of her knowledge to someone strong enough to bear it. Everett listened without judgment, asking pointed questions that revealed a sharp intelligence behind his aristocratic bearing. A knock interrupted them. Mrs. Humphreys entered, her expression grave. Your Grace, a rider has arrived from Bath. Urgent message. One, ask Grace. One sons of. Everett took the sealed letter, his jaw tightening as he read. When he looked up, his eyes found Verity's. Your husband has discovered your absence. He's offering a reward for information leading to your recovery and has written to the magistrate claiming you're mentally unstable and a danger to yourself. The room tilted. Verity gripped the arms of her chair, fighting the wave of dizziness. He's coming. Not yet. Everett's voice cut through her panic. He's testing the waters first, seeing if anyone saw you leave, building his narrative. But yes, eventually, he'll come. Then I should go. She started to rise. I won't bring this trouble to your door. Sit down, Mrs. Carlyle. It was the first time he'd used that tone with her, not harsh, but absolutely commanding. She sat. You're not going anywhere. We knew this was coming. Now we simply prepare. The solicitor arrived that afternoon, a Mr. Pembley, a shrewd-looking man in his 50s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles. He listened to Verity's story without interruption, occasionally making notes in a leather-bound book. When she finished, he sat back with a heavy sigh. I won't lie to you, Mrs. Carlyle. This will be difficult. English law heavily favors husbands in these matters. A wife is considered property, essentially, and a husband has almost unlimited rights over her person and possessions. Almost unlimited, Everett interjected. But not entirely. There are precedents for legal separation in cases of extreme cruelty. Indeed, Mr. Pembley agreed, but they're rare and require substantial evidence. Physical proof of abuse, multiple witnesses, and, ideally, some moral failing on the husband's part that the courts can't ignore. He turned to Verity. You mentioned gambling debts and infidelity. Those help, but they're not enough on their own. Many gentlemen gamble, and keep mistresses without social consequence. Then what do we need? Verity's voice came out steadier than she felt. We need to prove that your life was in danger. We need witnesses who can testify to visible injuries, to threats they overheard, to your husband's violent temperament. And we need to move quickly before he can establish his narrative of you as an unstable wife who abandoned her duties. Everett stood and walked to the window, his back rigid with tension. Days, perhaps a week before he comes looking himself. He's being careful now, using official channels, painting himself as the concerned husband. But when those channels fail to produce results, he'll take more direct action. Mr. Pembley closed his book with a decisive snap. I suggest we immediately begin gathering depositions. Mrs. Carlyle, think carefully. Did anyone see your injuries? A doctor, perhaps, or servants in your household? Verity's mind raced back through 3 years of careful concealment. There was a physician once, Dr. Whitmore. Silas called him when I fell down the stairs. The lie tasted bitter even now. She hadn't fallen, she'd been pushed during one of Silas's rages. Dr. Whitmore seemed suspicious. He asked questions that Silas didn't like. Did he document the injuries? I don't know. Silas dismissed him rather abruptly, and never called him again. Logging, we have my press. Mr. Pembley made a note. I'll contact Dr. Whitmore immediately. Even if he kept no records, his testimony about his suspicions could prove valuable. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. There's one other option, though it's unconventional and carries its own risks. Tell me, Everett said, turning from the window. Annulment. If we can prove the marriage was entered into under false pretenses, for instance, if Mr. Carlyle concealed debts or other material facts that Mrs. Carlyle would have reasonably needed to know before consenting, we might petition for annulment rather than separation. Hope flared in Verity's chest. Would that free me completely? In theory, yes. An annulled marriage is treated as if it never existed. But, Mr. Pembley held up a cautionary hand, it's even more difficult to obtain than separation. The standards of proof are higher, and the social stigma can be worse. A separated woman is pitiable. An annulled wife is often seen as somehow complicit in the deception. So either way, I'm ruined. Verity heard the flatness in her own voice. Either way, you're free, Everett corrected quietly. The rest is just noise. His certainty steadied her. She drew a breath and turned back to Mr. Pembley. What do you recommend? I recommend we pursue both avenues simultaneously. Gather evidence for separation while investigating grounds for annulment. Cast as wide a net as possible. He stood, gathering his papers. In the meantime, Mrs. Carlyle, you should remain here at Thornbury. His Grace's protection is considerable. But more importantly, his household staff can serve as witnesses to your current state. The injuries, the fear, the clear signs of abuse. The longer you're here and safe, the stronger our case becomes. After Mr. Pembley departed, Verity found herself alone with Everett in the library. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, painting everything in shades of gold. She should have felt relief she had allies now, a plan, resources she could never have imagined. Instead, she felt exhausted, as if the weight of 3 years had suddenly crashed down on her all at once. You should rest, Everett said gently. This has been overwhelming. I feel like I should be doing something, planning, preparing. You've done enough. You escaped, which took more courage than most people possess in their entire lives. Let others carry the burden for a while. She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the sincerity in his gray-green eyes. "Why are you doing this? And please don't tell me it's simply nobility or duty. There's something more. Why? And why? Why?" Everett was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. She packed a bag, took me by the hand, and we made it as far as the front gate before Father caught us. He paused, jaw working. He didn't hit her. He didn't have to. He simply reminded her that legally, I belonged to him, that if she left, she'd never see me again, that he'd make sure I knew she abandoned me. So she stayed, Verity whispered. She stayed. And 2 years later, she died. His hands had curled into fists. The physician said, "Heart failure," but I knew better. I'd watched her fade day by day, watched her spirit break under the weight of her cage. She stayed to protect me, and it killed her. Verity crossed to him without thinking, placing her hand over his clenched fist. "I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry. Just let me help you. Let me do for you what no one did for her." His hand turned, fingers threading through hers, and the contact sent warmth through her that had nothing to do with physical comfort and everything to do with connection, understanding, shared pain, transformed into shared purpose. 3 days passed in uneasy peace. Verity fell into a routine at Thornbury mornings in the library, reading or helping Everett with correspondence. Afternoons walking the gardens as her injuries healed. Evenings by the fire, discussing strategy with Mr. Pembley, who visited daily with updates. The news was mixed. Dr. Whitmore had indeed kept notes about his suspicions and was willing to testify. Lady Pembroke, when located, had wept and immediately offered her support, confirming that she'd noticed Verity's withdrawal and the implausible explanations for various injuries. But Silas's campaign was gaining momentum too. He'd painted himself as the devoted husband, desperate to recover his beloved but mentally fragile wife, and society, always eager for drama, was largely sympathetic to his plight. "He's offering £500 now, Mr. Pembley reported on the third evening, his expression grim. "For information leading to your recovery. That's enough to tempt even loyal servants." Verity's stomach twisted. "Then it's only a matter of time. We've been preparing for this," Everett reminded her. He'd been quieter today, distracted, and she wondered what weighed on his mind. "Every day you're here, every witness we gather, strengthens our position." But that night, lying awake in her comfortable bed, Verity couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. She rose and wrapped herself in a dressing gown, stepping onto the small balcony despite the cold. The gardens below were silver with moonlight, peaceful and still. Couldn't sleep either. She turned to find Everett standing in the doorway, still fully dressed. His cravat was loosened, his hair disheveled as if he'd been running his hands through it. "I keep thinking he'll appear at any moment," she admitted. "That I'll wake to find him standing over me. And this will all have been a dream." Everett stepped onto the balcony, maintaining a respectful distance. "I've increased the guard. No one enters this estate without my knowledge. You're safe here, Verity." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and something about the intimacy of it in the darkness made her breath catch. "You can't protect me forever. Eventually, the law will demand my return. The law can demand all it likes. I have no intention of complying." His voice carried an edge she hadn't heard before, something fierce and uncompromising. "I told you men like your husband rely on everyone else following rules they themselves ignore. Well, I'm done following rules designed to protect monsters. You could be charged with kidnapping, harboring a fugitive. Let them try." He turned to face her fully, and in the moonlight his features were sharp, almost severe. "I have wealth, title, and more importantly, I have contacts who owe me favors. Parliamentary members, judges, men with power, who understand that sometimes the law and justice are not the same thing. Verity felt tears prick her eyes. I don't understand why you're risking so much for me. I'm nobody. A failed wife. A scandal. Waiting to explode. You're not nobody. He closed the distance between them, his hands gentle on her shoulders. You're a woman who survived 3 years of hell and still had the strength to fight for her freedom. You're brave and resilient, and you deserve better than what life has given you. The tears fell then, and she didn't try to stop them. Everett pulled her into an embrace that was careful of her healing injuries, but firm enough to make her feel anchored, safe. She buried her face in his chest and let herself cry for the girl she'd been before Silas, for the years stolen from her, for the future that still felt impossibly fragile. When the tears finally subsided, she pulled back enough to look up at him. Thank you. For everything. Don't thank me yet. But his smile was soft, almost tender. The moment stretched between them, charged with something neither was quite ready to name. Then Everett stepped back, and the spell broke. Try to sleep. Tomorrow, Mr. Pembley is bringing witnesses from Bath servants from your household willing to testify. Their statements could be the breakthrough we need. After he left, Verity returned to bed. But sleep remained elusive. She kept replaying the feel of his arms around her, the steadiness of his heartbeat beneath her ear. She was developing feelings for him she'd be a fool not to recognize it. But she was still married, still trapped in a legal web that made any future impossible. Loving Everett would only bring him more pain, more scandal. She couldn't do that to him. He'd already sacrificed too much. Morning arrived with unexpected chaos. Verity woke to raised voices below her window. Everett's voice, sharp with authority, and another voice she didn't recognize, but that made her blood run cold anyway. Male, educated, carrying the particular arrogance of someone who believed himself entirely in the right. She threw on her dressing gown and hurried downstairs, her heart pounding. In the entrance hall, she found Everett facing off against a man in a magistrate's uniform, flanked by 2 constables, and behind them, looking simultaneously triumphant and concerned, stood Silas Carlyle. He looked exactly as she remembered, handsome in a conventional way, with auburn hair and blue eyes that had once seemed kind. Now she saw only calculation in those eyes, and possessiveness, and rage barely held in check. Verity, he said, his voice dripping with false concern. She couldn't speak, couldn't move. Her body had frozen, trapped in 3 years of conditioned fear. Mrs. Carlyle is under my protection, Everett said coldly. You have no authority here. The magistrate, a pompous-looking man with mutton-chop whiskers, puffed up importantly. I have every authority. Your Grace. Mr. Carlyle has sworn statements that his wife is mentally unstable and fled during a period of confusion. As her husband, he has the legal right to take her into his custody for her own safety. She's not confused or unstable, Everett growled. She's escaping abuse. That's a serious accusation, the magistrate said, his tone suggesting he found it entirely unbelievable. Do you have proof? Do you have proof? Yes, said a voice from behind them. Mr. Pembley strode in, followed by Dr. Whitmore, Lady Pembroke, and 3 others Verity vaguely recognized servants from the bathhouse. Substantial proof, in fact. Perhaps we should discuss this in a more civilized manner? Silas's expression darkened, but the magistrate looked uncertain now, thrown off by the presence of witnesses and legal counsel. This is highly irregular. What's irregular? Lady Pembroke interrupted with aristocratic authority. Is a magistrate taking a husband's word without investigation? I am prepared to testify that I witnessed multiple suspicious injuries on Mrs. Carlyle over the past 3 years. As is Dr. Whitmore. The drawing room became an impromptu courtroom. Everett insisted on it. If the magistrate wanted to remove Verity from Thornbury, he'd do it only after hearing all the evidence. The man clearly didn't like having his authority challenged, but he was also shrewd enough to recognize that this situation was more complicated than a simple case of a runaway wife. Dr. Whitmore spoke first, his testimony clinical but damning. He described examining Verity 18 months ago for injuries allegedly sustained in a fall, a broken rib, extensive bruising, defensive wounds on her forearms. In my professional opinion, those injuries were not consistent with a simple fall. They indicated sustained physical assault. Why didn't you report this? The magistrate demanded. I tried, Doctor, Whitmore said quietly. I suggested Mrs. Carlyle might benefit from extended rest away from home. Mr. Carlyle dismissed me from his service immediately and refused to allow me near his wife again. Silas leaned forward, his mask of concern slipping slightly. The doctor was incompetent. I sought better care for my wife. Yet no other physician was ever called Mr. Pembley interjected smoothly. Despite Mrs. Carlyle suffering at least 3 more documented injuries in the following months. Curious, wouldn't you say? Lady Pembroke testified next, her voice shaking with emotion but her resolve clear. She described watching a vibrant young woman retreat into fearful silence, always with new explanations for bruises and cuts. I tried to help. I invited her to stay with me, offered her sanctuary. Mr. Carlyle forbade it, claiming I was a bad influence. That's when I knew something was terribly wrong. Then the servant spoke a housemaid named Jenny who'd heard screaming and crashes through locked doors, a footman who'd witnessed Silas dragging Verity up the stairs by her hair, a cook who'd been ordered to restrict Verity's meals as punishment for some imagined slight. Each testimony painted a picture of systematic cruelty, of a household where everyone knew what was happening but felt powerless to intervene. Throughout it all, Silas maintained his composure. Though Verity could see the rage building behind his eyes, she knew that look, knew what it meant. If he got her back, she wouldn't survive the night. This is preposterous, Silas said when the testimonies concluded. My wife was delicate, prone to accidents, and yes, sometimes I was forced to discipline her for her own good. Discipline? Everett's voice cut like a blade. Is that what you call breaking her ribs? Starving her? Threatening her life? I call it managing my household, as is my legal right. Silas rose, his pleasant mask finally cracking to reveal the monster beneath. She is my wife, my property under law. And no amount of testimony from jealous women and disloyal servants changes that fact. The magistrate looked deeply uncomfortable now. Mr. Carlyle, while the law does grant husbands authority, these accusations are serious. Perhaps a formal investigation. There's more, Mr. Pembley said quietly. He pulled a document from his case. Yesterday, we obtained Mr. Carlyle's financial records. They make for interesting reading. Silas went very still. It seems Mr. Carlyle married Mrs. Verity with substantial debts, gambling obligations totaling over £8,000, owed to some rather unsavory creditors. He systematically depleted her dowry to pay these debts without her knowledge. Additionally, he maintains a separate household for his mistress, one Miss Kitty Forsyth, at an expense of nearly £200 annually. Many men have mistresses, Silas said, but his voice had lost its certainty. Many men don't commit fraud in the process, Mr. Pembley countered. You represented yourself as financially sound during courtship. You concealed debts that any reasonable woman would have considered material to her decision to marry. That, Mr. Carlyle, his grounds for annulment. The word hung in the air like a bell strike. Annulment. Not separation, but the complete dissolution of the marriage, as if it had never existed. The magistrate cleared his throat. These are serious allegations. Mr. Carlyle, do you deny the debts? Silas's jaw worked. He couldn't deny them, the records were irrefutable. What I did with my wife's money is my business. Not when obtained through deception, the magistrate said. And Verity heard the shift in his tone. He'd arrived, prepared to enforce a husband's rights. Now he was seeing something uglier: fraud, abuse. A pattern of behavior that even English law's bias toward men couldn't entirely excuse. I'm going to recommend this matter be referred to ecclesiastical court for annulment proceedings. In the meantime, Mrs. Carlyle should remain under neutral protection. She's staying here, Everett said flatly. Under my protection, which I assure you is anything but neutral. The magistrate bristled. Your Grace, that's highly improper. So is forcing a woman back to a man who's been beating her for 3 years. Everett's voice could have cut glass. Mrs. Carlyle stays at Thornbury until the courts rule otherwise. If you have an issue with that, take it up with the Lord Chancellor. He's my godfather. The revelation silenced the room. Even Silas seemed to deflate slightly, recognizing that he'd underestimated the depth of Everett's connections and commitment. The magistrate gathered his papers with the air of a man who'd wandered into something far more complicated than he'd bargained for. Very well. The matter will be referred to higher authorities. Mr. Carlyle, you're not to approach your wife or attempt contact. Mrs. Carlyle, you will remain at Thornbury and make yourself available for further testimony. After they left Silas shooting Verity one last look that promised retribution, if he ever got the chance, the drawing room erupted into relieved chaos. Whitmore shook Everett's hand with obvious respect. The servants clustered together, looking frightened but determined. You were all so brave, Verity told them, her voice breaking. Thank you. Thank you for speaking the truth, when it would have been easier to stay silent. Jenny, the young housemaid, stepped forward. We should have spoken sooner, ma'am. We knew what was happening. We should have helped. You helped today. That's what matters. As the witnesses departed, promising to remain available for the court proceedings, Verity found herself alone with Everett in the drawing room. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, and she felt simultaneously exhausted and exhilarated. They'd won this battle. Not the war yet, but this crucial first battle. The annulment proceedings took 3 months. 3 months of depositions and investigations, of Verity recounting her marriage in excruciating detail to church officials who listened with varying degrees of sympathy. 3 months of living at Thornbury, watching winter give way to early spring, watching the gardens come alive with color. 3 months of slowly healing not just her body, but her spirit. And 3 months of falling irrevocably in love with Everett Ashford. She tried to resist it. Told herself it was gratitude, proximity, the natural response to kindness after years of cruelty. But it was more than that. It was the way he listened when she spoke, really listened, as if her thoughts mattered. The way he'd quietly rearranged his library to include novels he thought she'd enjoy. The way he never touched her without permission. Never raised his voice. Never made her feel small or stupid or afraid. It was the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching, with tenderness and longing and a carefully restrained desire that made her heart race. They were careful. They maintained propriety. Always had Mrs. Humphreys or another servant nearby when they were together. But there were moments, hands brushing when reaching for the same book, lingering glances across the dinner table. Conversations that stretched late into the evening, when the air between them felt charged with possibility. Mr. Pembley visited regularly with updates. Silas had fought the annulment viciously at first, hiring expensive solicitors and trying to paint Verity as the deceiver. But the evidence was overwhelming. The financial fraud, the testimonies about abuse, even the discovery that Silas had concealed a previous engagement that ended when the young woman's family discovered his debts. It all built a case too strong to ignore. The ecclesiastical court's decision arrived on a Tuesday morning in early April. Verity was in the garden cutting flowers when Mrs. Humphreys found her, slightly breathless from hurrying. "Mr. Pembley is here, dear. And His Grace. They're waiting in the library." Verity's hands trembled as she set down the shears. This was it. Either freedom or a return to nightmare. She walked to the library on legs that felt like water, steeling herself for disappointment, even as hope fluttered dangerously in her chest. Everett stood by the window, his expression unreadable. Mr. Pembley sat at the desk, papers spread before him. Both men looked up as she entered, and something in their faces made her breath catch. "Well?" she whispered. Mr. Pembley smiled, actually smiled, something she'd rarely seen him do. "The marriage has been annulled. As of this morning, you are legally free, Miss Hartley." Her maiden name, she'd almost forgotten it. "Free," she repeated, testing the word. "Completely free," Mr. Pembley confirmed. The court ruled that Mr. Carlyle obtained the marriage through fraud and deception. Furthermore, given the documented abuse, they've granted you restoration of your dowry, what remains of it. At least, Mr. Carlyle has been ordered to repay the funds he misappropriated. "He'll never pay," Verity said. "No, probably not. But the legal precedent matters, and his reputation is destroyed." Mr. Pembley gathered his papers. "You've won, Miss Hartley. Truly won." After Mr. Pembley left, Verity stood in the library, feeling unmoored. She'd spent 3 months preparing for this moment. But now that it had arrived, she didn't know what to feel. Relief. Certainly. Joy, perhaps. But also a strange emptiness, as if the weight she'd carried for so long had been removed, and she hadn't yet adjusted to its absence. "How are you?" Everett asked softly. "I don't know." She laughed. A slightly hysterical sound. "Free. I'm free. I can go anywhere. Do anything. I can." Her voice broke. "I don't know what to do." "You don't have to decide immediately." He crossed to her, his movements careful. "Thornbury is your home, for as long as you want it to be." "I can't stay forever," she said, even though the thought of leaving made her chest ache. "People will talk. Your reputation." "Damn my reputation." The vehemence surprised her. "Verity, these past 3 months, having you here, you've brought life back to this house. Back to me. I know it's too soon. I know you need time to heal and discover who you are outside of marriage and fear. But I need you to know when you're ready. If you're ever ready. I would be honored if you'd consider." "Yes," she interrupted. He blinked. "I haven't finished the question." "Yes," she repeated, stepping closer. "Whatever you were going to ask, the answer is yes. Because I love you, Everett. I think I've loved you since you found me hiding in your carriage and chose compassion over convenience." His eyes widened, and for a moment he looked almost vulnerable. "I love you too. God help me. I tried not to. I told myself you needed a protector, not another man making demands. But I love you, Verity Hartley. Your strength, your resilience, your capacity for hope, despite everything you've endured." She reached up, cupping his face with hands that no longer trembled. Then ask me again, properly. A smile tugged at his lips, that slight, rare smile she'd come to treasure. He took her hands in his, and his voice was steady and sure. Verity Hartley, would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife? Not because you need protection or security, but because I cannot imagine my life without you in it? Yes, she said again, and this time she was laughing and crying simultaneously. Yes, 1,000 times yes. He kissed her then, gentle and careful and full of promise. It was nothing like Silas's brutal claiming. It was a question and an answer, a beginning rather than an ending. When they finally pulled apart, Verity rested her forehead against his. People will say I'm marrying you for your title, for security. Let them say it. I know the truth. He brushed a strand of hair from her face. You're marrying me because somehow, impossibly, we found each other in the darkness and chose to walk toward the light together. They were married quietly 6 months later in the small church on the Thornbury estate, with only Mrs. Humphreys, Mr. Pembley, Lady Pembroke, and a handful of close friends in attendance. Verity wore a simple cream dress and carried spring roses from the garden. Everett's hands shook slightly when he placed the ring on her finger, not from fear, but from joy. Silas Carlyle, she heard later, had fled to the continent to escape his creditors. She felt nothing when she learned this, no satisfaction, no lingering fear. He was simply part of a past she'd survived and left behind. As Verity stood beside her new husband in the garden that had witnessed her healing, watching the sun set over Thornbury's grounds, she thought about the terrified woman who'd hidden in a stranger's carriage 3 months ago. That woman had been brave enough to risk everything for freedom. This woman, the one she'd become, was brave enough to risk her heart for love. Happy? Everett asked, wrapping an arm around her waist. She leaned into him, finally, completely safe. Happy doesn't begin to cover it. And for the first time in years, Verity's smile reached her eyes. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as beautiful and intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. See you on the next one.